You ever see a grown woman scream at a deaf man for making too much noise? I did. And I wish I could say it was the first time. But this wasn't just some random jerk on the street. This was Karren Macklin, the HOA president of our quiet little neighborhood in Willow Hills. Middle-aged, always in a pressed blouse and ironed khakis, and drunk on power like she ran the Pentagon instead of a cul-de-sac. My name's Xander O'Neill. I'm a mechanic with a home garage and a soft spot for people who get pushed around. And my neighbor, Leo, is one of the kindest guys I've ever met. He's in his 60s, completely deaf since birth, and works nights cleaning at the hospital. Quiet as a ghost, always keeps to himself, never throws parties, never even mows late. But apparently, that didn't stop Karren from accusing him of blasting music at all hours. Yeah, music, as if he could even hear it, started about 2 months ago. I was working under the hood of a '76 Chevy Caprice when I heard her shrill voice echoing across the street. "This is the 3rd time this week, Leo," she screeched, waving that stupid clipboard she always carried like it was a badge. "I don't care if you can't hear it. I can. It's disruptive." I stood up, wiping grease off my hands. "Karren," I called out, "you sure it's Leo's place? I haven't heard anything from him. And I'm right next door." She wheeled around to face me like I just insulted her ancestors. "Xander, not everything is about you. He probably turns it up louder because he can't hear. It's inconsiderate. Or it's not happening," I said, walking over. "Leo's not exactly throwing raves in there. He's been warned. If he doesn't fix it, the HOA will fine him." Now here's the kicker. HOA rules stated that noise complaints required at least 2 independent reports and recordings if possible. Karren? She never filed anything. No evidence, just her word. And Leo? He signed everything that came to his door. Never argued. Never even fully understood half of it. His reading level wasn't the best, and Karren knew it. I'd had enough. That night, I invited Leo over. Sat him down at my kitchen table and pulled out my laptop. I typed everything out slowly, point by point, while he read. His face fell. He'd been getting fines for weeks. Hundreds of dollars. And he'd just been paying them, blindly trusting the system. I told him I'd help. He smiled, nodded, and tapped his heart. I didn't need any more motivation. The next morning, I installed 2 security cameras, one facing my house, one facing Leo's porch. Motion activated, full audio. If Karren wanted to keep pushing this fantasy, I was going to catch her in the act. It didn't take long. 3 days later, I was in my garage when I saw her again. Clipboard in hand, storming across Leo's yard like she owned it. She didn't even knock. Just started banging on his door, screaming, "Turn it down. I've told you over and over. You're disturbing the entire neighborhood." Leo stepped out, confused. He held up his phone. He'd been watching a silent cooking video with captions. That's it. No music. No TV. Nothing. Karren jabbed her finger at him. "I don't care what you're watching. I hear it. It's loud." He tried to sign, but she cut him off. "Don't give me that. I don't need hand signs. I need peace and quiet." That was it. I walked straight over and stood between them. "You're harassing him," I said. "He hasn't made a single noise. You're lying, and I've got cameras to prove it." Karren's face twisted like she bit into a lemon. "You're defending him? You don't even know what he does at night." "I know exactly what he does. He works, comes home, eats, and sleeps. You're the only one yelling in this neighborhood." She huffed and stormed off, but not before spitting out, "You'll regret getting involved, Xander." I didn't. Not for 1 second. The next HOA letter came 2 days later. This time it was for me. Unregistered surveillance equipment violating community guidelines, and a warning for interfering with official HOA matters. Cute. I emailed them back with a copy of the Willow Hills bylaws. Nowhere did it ban security cameras on private property. And since the HOA board never voted on it, Karren had no authority to issue that fine. I also attached the footage from earlier that week. No response. But then things got worse. Leo got another fine. This one for verbal threats against a board member. That's right. A deaf man was accused of threatening Karren. She claimed he lunged at her and yelled profanities. The footage showed her spitting insults while he stood still, hands at his side. I forwarded it to the rest of the HOA board. 3 members. 2 of them replied with the same canned message, "This matter has been reviewed and closed." The third, a younger guy named Marcus, came to my door that night. "Xander," he said, "I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even see the footage until today. Karren's been handling all the noise complaints herself. We never voted on any of the fines." That's when it hit me. Karren was the HOA. She'd been acting alone, forging board approvals, and cashing the fines through a shell account. Leo wasn't her only victim, but he was the easiest one to bully. We had to go bigger. Marcus helped me gather documents, fake notices, mismatched signatures, even copies of bank transfers that didn't line up with the HOA's official ledger. Karren had been skimming for months. And the noise complaints? All fabricated. We needed one more thing. One last recording. Not just to clear Leo, but to bury Karren. And we got it. The night we got the final recording, Marcus and I sat in my kitchen with a pot of strong coffee between us and tension hanging heavier than the summer humidity. He'd just gotten off a conference call with a friend of his in the city's legal department, a favor called in under the radar. What we had wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. It was financial fraud, harassment, and if we played our cards right, grounds for criminal charges. The footage showed everything we needed. Karren had returned to Leo's porch just after midnight. She wasn't alone this time. She brought along her cousin, Greg, an ex-cop who'd been booted off the force for procedural misconduct, which is a polite way of saying he liked to throw his weight around. They didn't ring the bell. They just stood outside his door, whispering. Then Greg pulled a small Bluetooth speaker from his jacket, placed it beneath Leo's bedroom window, and hit play. It blasted some kind of industrial techno loud enough to wake the dead. After 5 solid minutes of this racket, Greg cut the sound and the 2 of them jogged back to Karren's SUV, parked without lights on the corner. She was laughing. That's how she'd been manufacturing her complaints. Leo never even stirred. He was on the far side of the house wearing heavy-duty sleep aids and blackout curtains. But the rest of the neighborhood heard it just like she wanted. Marcus leaned forward, rewinding the clip. "She's staging noise to justify fines," he muttered. "That's fraud. And the timing, she waited until your cameras were pointed away, but didn't account for your side angle catching the reflection off the glass." I nodded. "She thinks she's untouchable. That's how people like her get sloppy." The next day, we went to Leo. I typed everything out again, slow and clear, walking him through the footage. He didn't need long to catch on this time. His jaw clenched. Then, for the first time since I'd known him, he grabbed a pen and wrote out a single sentence on the back of an envelope. "I want her gone." We started with the restraining order. Marcus's legal contact helped us draft a petition that included the video, the pattern of fines, the forged board approvals, and a sworn statement from Leo. I drove him to the courthouse myself. He signed the paperwork with hands that trembled only slightly. The clerk at the front desk raised her eyebrows when she saw the evidence packet. "This might be more than a restraining order," she said. We agreed. By the end of the week, a temporary order was approved banning Karren from coming within 50 feet of Leo or communicating with him in any form. She was served at her own HOA meeting by the sheriff during open comments. The look on her face could have curdled milk. But we weren't done. I filed a formal complaint with the city's Department of Community Affairs, outlining how Karren had been issuing fines without board approval, falsifying documents, and potentially laundering funds through a fake HOA services vendor called Golden Path Solutions. Marcus traced the payments over $15,000 in the past year, all billed for contractor services no one ever saw. We got lucky. The city had just opened an independent review board for HOA misconduct. They fast-tracked Karren's case. Meanwhile, Karren was unraveling. She couldn't approach Leo anymore, but she found other ways to lash out. She flooded the neighborhood with flyers claiming certain residents were trying to undermine community order. She started ticketing people for imaginary violations, lawn height, mailbox shape, even unauthorized decorative choices. One woman got fined for having a blue welcome mat. I knew she was spiraling when I caught her photographing my license plate while I was unloading groceries. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "You think you're a hero? You're just a loudmouth with a wrench. And you're a petty tyrant with a clipboard," I replied. "That's the difference." She stormed off, but not before slapping a citation on my windshield. Vehicle maintenance in public view. My truck was parked in my own driveway. The next morning, Marcus called me. She tried to call an emergency board meeting. I told her no. She threatened to have me removed. On what grounds? She said I was colluding with hostile residents. I told her that's not a real thing. That's when we decided it was time to take it public. We called a special community meeting. Not an HOA meeting, just a gathering of residents at the local community center. Word spread fast. Apparently, we weren't the only ones tired of Karren's games. By the time we arrived, over 40 neighbors had shown up, some still in scrubs or work boots, others with babies in strollers or dogs on leashes. We dimmed the lights and played the footage. First, the midnight noise stunt. Then the clips of her yelling at Leo, forging signatures, and pocketing checks. Finally, Marcus pulled up the payment records to Golden Path Solutions, complete with an address that led to a shuttered gas station in another county. You could hear a pin drop. Then someone in the back, a retired teacher named Mrs. Delaney, stood up. I paid $300 to that company when my fence was too high. They said it was a required correction fee. Others started chiming in. Fines. Threats. Unexplained charges. Letters that never made sense. We passed around a petition to suspend Karren pending the city's investigation and install an interim board led by Marcus and 2 other residents vetted that night. Within 20 minutes, we had 37 signatures, enough for a community vote. Karren tried to crash the meeting. She stormed in halfway through a neighbor's testimony and demanded we disperse. This isn't sanctioned. This is illegal assembly. Marcus turned to her. No, Karren. What you've been doing. That was illegal. This is accountability. She lunged for the laptop playing the footage, but I blocked her with one step. You touch it, and I'll file assault charges to go with the fraud, I said. She froze, nostrils flaring. Then she pivoted, turned on her heel, and walked out without another word. The city's investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Within 2 weeks, they uncovered bank records confirming Karren had been routing HOA fines into a personal account under a fake business name. She was arrested outside her home early one morning, still in slippers, by 2 city officers and an auditor. Charges included embezzlement, falsifying official documents, and harassment of a disabled resident. The DA's office made a very public statement about it, citing a pattern of abuse and manipulation under the guise of community governance. Leo watched the news report from my couch. When the anchors read his name as the victim, he gave a single thumbs up and went back to sipping his tea. The restraining order became permanent. Karren was banned from serving on any HOA in the state. She eventually pleaded guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for restitution and community service. Part of her sentence? Delivering apology letters to every resident she fined. Handwritten. Leo got the first one. He opened it, read the first line, and tossed it in the recycling bin without a word. The new HOA board, led by Marcus, overhauled every process. Fines now required photographic proof, dual signatures, and 10-day grace periods. They implemented a transparency portal where all board decisions were posted publicly. Residents could vote on major changes. For the first time in years, people actually attended meetings without dread. As for me, I got a thank you card from Leo. Just 3 words written in big, careful print. You stood tall. I framed it. Still hangs in my garage above the workbench right next to the Caprice I finished restoring. Some people think power corrupts, but I've seen what really lets corruption thrive: silence. When good people say nothing, folks like Karren think they can rewrite the rules. But that year, in Willow Hills, we rewrote them back. The street was quieter now. Not the kind of eerie, tense silence that had seeped into Willow Hills during Karren's reign. This was different. You could hear dogs barking 2 blocks away, kids riding scooters, screen doors creaking open and slamming shut again. Normal sounds. No one tiptoed past Leo's house anymore. No one whispered about fines or checked their mailboxes with a pit in their stomach. The neighborhood was breathing again. But underneath the calm was something else. Something that hadn't made the local news. Something we hadn't even told most of the neighbors at the meeting. Karren's financial games were only part of it. See, when the authorities pulled apart her fake vendor payments and personal account transfers, they found something strange. A second account. One that wasn't in her name or Greg's. It was registered under a company called Rural Neighborhood Solutions LLC, based out of a single P.O. box in another county. The transactions didn't make sense: random amounts, odd timing, and the kicker? Some of the funds came from a state grant. Marcus called me the night he found out. She was applying for community improvement grants, he said, pacing across his own driveway while I leaned against my truck's tailgate. Small ones under the radar, but they're meant for safety upgrades in low-income neighborhoods. Security patrols, lighting, accessibility ramps. I frowned. We're not even eligible for those. Exactly. She faked the eligibility reports. Claimed we had a high concentration of residents with disabilities and elderly tenants needing ADA upgrades. Wait, is that why she kept filing those needs evaluation reports on Leo? Marcus stopped pacing. I think she exploited his file to justify the grant. She used his name. That was all I needed to hear. I walked straight into my garage, pulled the folder I'd been keeping on this whole mess, and started flipping through paperwork. One of the fines Karren had sent to Leo months ago included a printed memo about mandatory accessibility compliance inspection. I thought it was just another scare tactic. But now it made sense. She was building a paper trail. Leo hadn't just been bullied. He'd been used in a financial scheme that reached way outside our neighborhood. The next morning, we brought everything to the city auditor. The same guy who'd helped with the HOA investigation. He took one look at the fake grant documents and called in a state investigator. By the end of the week, the case was no longer just about Karren's embezzlement. It was a full-blown criminal fraud investigation involving state funds, falsified disability reports, and fabricated community need assessments. And it got worse. 3 other neighborhoods had received letters from Rural Neighborhood Solutions. Same P.O. box. Same formatting. Slightly different names on the documents, but all traced back to Karren's laptop. She'd been running the same scam in multiple HOAs she'd once worked with as a consultant years ago. She'd kept records. Sloppy ones. The DA's office added felony fraud to her charges and sealed the rest of the investigation. From then on, no more public updates. No more local reporters asking questions. Everything went dark. But not for us. About 2 weeks later, Leo got a letter. This time, not from the HOA or the city. It was from the state's Victim Restitution Board. They were apologizing, officially, and asking if he'd be willing to testify if it came to that. He brought it straight to me. I read it twice, then looked up. "You want to?" He nodded. Then he pointed to his chest and signed slowly, "I want them to hear me." I helped him prepare. We brought in a translator from the hospital where he worked, someone he trusted. She helped him put together a statement in both written and signed form. It was short, direct, no dramatics, just the facts. What she did, how it affected him. And the final line, which hit me like a hammer the first time I saw him sign it. She used my silence as her weapon. The court date was set for the following month. Karren had already accepted a plea deal for the original charges, but the new charges meant renegotiation. Her lawyer tried to stall, tried to claim mental strain, but the evidence was stacked taller than her clipboard collection ever was. On the day of the hearing, Leo wore a navy blue suit. I had never seen him wear anything but his hospital scrubs or a flannel shirt. He walked into that courtroom with his back straight and his chin up. The prosecutor didn't hold back. He laid out the entire scheme, how Karren had manipulated HOA documents to apply for over $30,000 in community grants across 4 neighborhoods. How she'd used falsified reports and forged signatures to frame it all as legitimate. And how Leo had been central to it, his name, his supposed disability risk profile, and even staged photos she submitted showing his home with fake trip hazards. Karren sat at the defense table, staring blankly ahead. No clipboard. No smugness. Just a woman who finally realized she wasn't the smartest person in the room. When Leo took the stand, the room went quiet. The interpreter stood next to him, relaying every sign with clarity. He didn't look at Karren once. He spoke about the fines, the threats, the fear. But he wasn't emotional. He was calm, controlled. And when he finished, he turned to the judge and bowed his head once. Then stepped down. Karren's lawyer didn't even try to cross-examine. The judge didn't need long. She was sentenced to 5 years of probation with mandatory restitution payments to every victim, barred from any position of authority in public or private housing associations, and ordered to complete 2 years of community service specifically with disability advocacy groups. She wasn't going to prison, not yet, but she was going to spend every month of the next 5 years paying back the very people she tried to exploit. The moment the gavel came down, Leo let out a breath I hadn't even realized he was holding. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The silence in that courtroom said enough. Afterward, outside the courthouse, a few neighbors who'd come to support us gathered around. Mrs. Delaney brought cookies. Marcus handed Leo a copy of the new HOA charter they'd ratified, complete with a clause preventing any member from holding more than one term without a full community vote. Someone asked Leo if he felt like justice had been served. He signed something short and the interpreter laughed before translating. She's going to be picking up trash next to a ramp she once claimed didn't exist. That feels like justice. We didn't celebrate with speeches or banners. We just walked back to our cars, Leo tucking the court copy of his statement into his coat pocket. Back in Willow Hills, we repainted the faded fire lane stripes she'd ignored for years. We installed real-motion sensor streetlights at the intersections. Marcus even got funding approved for a proper community notice board, one that didn't require Karren's approval to post on. People started waving again. Kids played in front yards without parents glancing over their shoulders for someone with a clipboard. And Leo? He applied for a grant of his own. This time a legitimate one. For a sign language outreach program at the hospital. They approved it in less than 3 weeks. I saw him last weekend on his porch with a thermos of coffee and a book balanced on his knee. I offered him a nod. He raised his cup. No words needed. Some people think power is what makes someone dangerous. But it's not. It's the belief they'll never be caught. That no one will challenge them. That they can twist the rules, exploit the quiet, and walk away clean. But not in Willow Hills. Not anymore. It was early autumn when Willow Hills finally felt clean again. Leaves had started collecting in soft piles along the sidewalks, unraked but not neglected, just waiting for a quiet Saturday and a rake. Kids were back in school, the neighborhood dogs barked at squirrels instead of clipboard-toting tyrants, and for the first time in years, the HOA mailbox wasn't stuffed with anonymous complaints or overpriced violation notices. But that didn't mean the story was entirely over. There was still the matter of the secondary fraud investigation, the one involving state disability grants that Karren had manipulated using Leo's name. While the local charges had already led to restitution, probation, and her removal from the community, the deeper financial crimes had triggered something bigger. Something federal. Marcus and I had both been subpoenaed. Not because we were under investigation, but because our evidence had been used to build an interagency case. The Department of Housing and Urban Development had started digging, and they'd found a pattern that stretched beyond Willow Hills. Karren had submitted similar grant applications under different aliases in at least 2 other counties. Each one exploited loosely verified disability claims, and each one had been rubber-stamped due to a lack of oversight. Leo had been listed as a high-risk resident Class C in an official federal report. When I told him, he raised his eyebrows and signed, "That sounds like a military unit." We both laughed, but the weight of it wasn't lost on either of us. The trial was set at the regional courthouse, a few towns over. There were no press cameras this time, no city council members or curious neighbors. Just a courtroom with dull carpet, a judge who looked like she'd seen every scam in the book, and a pair of federal prosecutors who laid out the case with the precision of surgeons. They didn't just accuse Karren of filing fraudulent applications, they tied her to the creation of shell companies, falsified tax IDs, and identity misrepresentation. A forensics analyst from HUD showed how she'd used minor details from HOA records to create entire fictional households. Leo's information had been the most thoroughly exploited, but he wasn't alone. There were 5 others. Elderly residents from other communities. One of them, a veteran in his 80s, came in with a walker and a printed statement. He said he'd received a mysterious compliance kit in the mail years ago with forms he didn't understand and a return envelope already addressed. He'd signed them assuming they were related to home insurance. They weren't. They were part of Karren's forged supporting documents. The prosecutors didn't need a smoking gun. They had a bonfire. Emails, bank transfers, internal memos from grant committees, all of it pointed to her. The defense tried to argue that she had acted impulsively due to financial strain, but it fell flat. "No one buys the stress made me create 7 business entities and embezzle federal funds." Defense. Leo testified again, this time through a closed session. The judge allowed the court translator to work directly with him in a private room, away from the crowd. He didn't want to do it twice, he said. Once had been enough. But he agreed when he found out that the other victims were watching via closed-circuit video. "Let them see I'm not just a file," he signed. The trial lasted 3 days. On the 4th, the judge read the verdict. Guilty on all major counts. Fraud, identity exploitation, mail fraud, and misuse of federal funds related to disability services. Her sentence was immediate: 4 years in federal prison followed by 5 years of supervised release. No parole. She didn't look at anyone as they let her out. Not the judge, not the victims, not even her own attorney. Just kept her eyes on the floor. Back in Willow Hills, life didn't change overnight, but it did keep getting better in small, solid ways. The new HOA board had completed its first full quarter. Marcus had implemented an open vote system for all major expenditures, and they'd used leftover funds to repave the community walking trail that had been ignored for years. Residents started showing up to meetings without dread. The minutes were emailed out within 24 hours, and every financial transaction was made public in a shared drive. Leo became something of a quiet legend. People who had once avoided eye contact with him now waved when they walked past. He didn't suddenly become chatty, he was still Leo. Still liked his porch, his quiet coffee, and his late-night hospital shifts. But neighbors brought him home-baked bread. Kids left painted rocks on his steps. And once a week, he met with a small group of local volunteers to teach basic sign language at the community center. I stopped by one evening to drop off some tools he'd borrowed: a torque wrench and a socket set he'd used to fix a loose railing on his porch. I found him arranging chairs in a circle, a whiteboard behind him with the word community written in block letters. He handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a note from a woman named Trina, one of the other fraud victims. She lived 3 towns over. She'd written to thank him for testifying, said it gave her the courage to come forward herself. She didn't use sign language, but she ended the letter with a drawing of 2 hands coming together. He pointed to it, then tapped his chest. "We helped," he signed. Later that month, a letter arrived from the Regional Housing Authority. It said that, due to the exposure of the fraud, grant policies would be revised. Disability verification would now require in-person confirmation, and all HOA-related applications would need third-party oversight. Karren's case had triggered a policy change that would affect over 500 neighborhoods across the state. Marcus called me the next day. "That's the kind of paperwork I don't mind reading," he said. "I'll drink to that," I replied, already cracking open a bottle of ginger beer in the garage. Fall rolled into winter. The neighborhood held its first holiday block party in years. No permits, no fines, no angry notices, just hot cider, string lights, and mismatched lawn chairs pulled into driveways. Someone set up a projector and played old Christmas cartoons on the side of a garage. Kids danced in puffy coats, chasing each other with candy canes and plastic snowman hats. Leo came, too. He wore a knit cap and stood next to me under a patio heater. I offered him a cup of cider. He took it, then pointed to the screen. "Too loud," he signed with a grin. I laughed. "Not anymore, Leo. Not anymore." The night ended with sparklers and a stray snow flurry that sent everyone running for blankets. As we packed up tables and folded chairs, someone started humming a tune, and soon half the block joined in. Off-key, out of sync, but joyful. It wasn't just a celebration. It was proof. Proof that neighborhoods don't need tyrants to stay orderly. That rules don't mean anything unless they're enforced with fairness. That silence doesn't equal weakness. And that justice, when it finally comes, may not erase the damage, but it can make people whole again. I glanced over at Leo as he waved goodbye to a kid with frosting on his face and a balloon in his hand. He looked peaceful. Not victorious, not proud, just settled. And for the first time since the chaos began, I knew it was actually over. We hadn't just gotten rid of a bully. We'd reclaimed a community.